All right, thanks everybody for joining me today. I was supposed to be giving a presentation titled Examining Online Posting Profiles of Violent and Non-Violent Right-Wing Extremists. Unfortunately, one of our colleagues in the paper passed away recently. Many of you know Dr. Gareth Davies, so we weren't able to get this done. But what I am going to do today is present the broader project that have a number of findings. I'm going to hit all the highlights, and I'm going to offer some suggestions on how to move forward and talk about a current project that I'm working on based on the current findings today. I first want to thank Wally Wazasowski, Steve Cermak, Josh Freilich, and Tiana Gaudet. They've been heavily involved in this project as well. So like most of us, violent extremists and terrorists often leave a digital footprint behind, including but certainly not limited to the extreme or far right. A couple key examples: Tarrant live streamed his attack, announced his intentions, and produced a manifesto beforehand. John Drawn, or however you want to pronounce it, live streamed parts of his attack, as well as posted a manifesto citing the so-called Great Replacement theory. These are just a couple examples. There are certainly many. But in these cases, and indeed others, many researchers, practitioners, and policymakers have oftentimes asked critical questions about whether these individuals can be identified online before they engage in violence offline. But despite these ongoing efforts, few analyses have been able to identify which online users have actually engaged in violent extremism offline and assess their online posting patterns or behaviors. And even fewer analyses have identified the differences in online posting behaviors of those who share extremist beliefs but are nonviolent, and those who share extremist beliefs but are violent. So in other words, researchers overwhelmingly focus on identifying and examining extremists online and not those who adhere to extremist beliefs and are also violent. So we've been part of a project now that's been going on for, I believe, 6 years. We've been examining the online posting behavioral patterns of both violent and non-violent right-wing extremists within one particular subform of one particular online space, Stormfront. We chose Stormfront. I'll explain to you why in a couple minutes. It's not really about Stormfront. It was just the data that made sense for how we were able to collect the data. And we looked at the open access portions of Stormfront. And the purpose here was to provide valuable means for researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to think critically about online behaviors, to essentially cut through what Adam was discussing earlier, through the online noise, and identify credible threats. And as I was alluding to before, the purpose is to extend beyond Stormfront by providing valuable insights into broad posting behaviors of extremists in general, i.e. developing baselines, which we generally don't have, as well as thinking critically about violent and non-violent extremist posting behaviors in particular. For this particular exercise or project, the data included roughly about 125,000 posts, open access, like I said before, made by approximately 7,000 users between 2001 and 2017 in Stormfront, Canada. And for those who aren't familiar with this project, you're probably wondering how the hell I was able to identify violent and non-violent users. Well, a former violent extremist who was very actively involved in the North American right-wing extremist movement reviewed an extensive list of users within Stormfront Canada and selected those who match one of the two user types, whether they're violent or not. So each time during this interview process that users were identified as those of interest, the former extremist was asked to explain in as much detail as possible why they were identified as violent or non-violent. They were also asked to provide examples of the activities that each identified user engaged in, as well as I was interested in knowing the former's association with those who were identified as violent or non-violent. And this was done as best as we could to identify or verify the authenticity of each identified user. And there's certainly a lot of limitations with this. In each published paper that we've done with this project, we've had extensive limitations. We can talk about it after, but I'm not going to get into it for the matter of time. So for the project in general, I think we published maybe 10 papers from this. We looked at posting frequencies over time, posting typologies, posting indicators of extremism. We've drawn from the FBI indicators list. We've looked at how collective identity formation takes shape. We've looked at persisting and desisting posting behaviors. We've looked at posting behaviors during peak posting events. We just came up with a paper, I think, last week looking at the influence of group membership on extremist posting behaviors. And we've used a variety of methods ranging from content analysis. We've done descriptive statistics, logistic regression, survival analysis, sentiment analysis, so on and so forth. like I said, I'm just going to really go through the key findings here, hit the highlights, and I'm going to move fairly quickly because I don't have a heck of a lot of time. But what I will say is several key posting characteristics were identified that have certainly have important policy and investigatory implications. And I've broken them down into 3 categories. The idea of ideologues and low profilers, persisters and desisters, and unassuming opportunists. So the first is the ideologues and the low profilers. So it was clear across all of our studies that violent users tend to be much less active online than non-violent users, and seem to actually modify their online presence based on posting very infrequently. When we compare to violent users, we find that the non-violent users display more threatening online behaviors that law enforcement and intelligence agencies may deem worthy of further investigation, especially from a credible perspective. And here what I'm saying is that not only do the non-violent users, not the violent, they post more content, they essentially post content that would be more concerning to those looking. So they post more ideological posts, and they especially post more violent mobilization posts. In other words, so what we're categorizing them here is that the online posting behaviors of non-violent right-wing extremists reflects one of what we'll call an ideologue, where they likely perceive their role in and engage with the movement by providing what we call conceptual tools that can then be taken up by violent users. So together then, from an analyst perspective, those searching for signs of violent extremism online should not only be concerned about investigating high-frequency posters, they should also be focused on low-profile, low-frequency posters, because they may in fact be your violent users. Second relates to the persisters and desisters. So our research in this space, which is in its infancy, we've only done a few pieces from this, we find that both the violent and non-violent right-wing extremists tend to desist in online posting behavior. So what I mean by desist is, at least how we've categorized it and with our sample, they tend to slow down and stop posting over time. This suggests that right-wing extremists, in our study at least, generally don't increase in posting behavior over time, as opposed to some theoretical work that's conceptualized a right-wing extremist online space as hornet's nest or lone wolf incubators. We're not finding that. We're not exactly sure why, but maybe the users are losing interest in a particular platform. Maybe they're switching platforms. Maybe they're more engaged in direct messaging. Maybe they go to prison. We just don't know at this time. But on the other hand, we also identified various posting subgroups of persisters and desisters. And persisters are those who increase in posting behavior over time at a steady rate. So here what I'm saying is that while we uncovered a noticeable subgroup of violent and non-violent persisters, people who increase over time, a small but noticeable group, we also found that it's the non-violent users who are more likely to persist over time than the violent users. So they were active online for longer, and they posted with more extremist content over time as well. Perhaps the non-violent users were unafraid to be active online because they refrained from, to the best of our knowledge, engaging in violence offline, and again, perceived their role in and engaged with the violent right-wing extremist movement as ideologues. So I guess importantly from a pragmatic perspective is pinpointing these ideologues or individuals who adopt these very active roles is important. We want to try to pinpoint them and examine their content because they are trying to promote to the masses. I think it's important to gauge what the ideologies are that they're promoting because they may actually in fact be driving the ideologies that push people to violence offline. And lastly is this idea of unassuming opportunists. So we did uncover a prominent subgroup of violent desisters who were low-profile users who posted very few messages in general and ideological messages in particular. What was striking here was that much of the content that they did post when they desisted actually encouraged others to mobilize to violent extremism offline. They also became active online generally right before they desisted. So it could have been a last-ditch effort that they made. Maybe they knew that they were going to post in the space anymore, so they tried to rile people up before they were going offline. We don't know. We don't know yet. And some of our other work looking at the posting behaviors during peak and non-peak posting days. So peak days we categorize as days that just generate the most buzz, have the most views, or have the most posting frequency. We found that it was the violent users, although unassuming, appeared to be opportunists. So what I'm saying here was that it was striking the extent to which the violent users posted violent mobilization messages during peak days compared to non-violent users. So what we found was that the violent users were posting noticeably more mobilization messages on peak days than they were on non-peak days, which is interesting. Perhaps the violent group, who were generally like the least active in our studies, saw peak days as opportune times to take advantage of the high traffic to mobilize others to violence. Make it count. They weren't posting a lot, but they figured, you know, on days that are generating the most buzz, let's inject into those days. This finding was quite surprising to us because our previous work has overwhelmingly found that it's the violent violent right-wing extremists who tend to post fewer violent mobilization efforts than the non-violent users. So future directions. I have a couple minutes left? 2, all right. Very quickly, there's a lot of limitations, including we have a small sample size, the data is based on one former extremist, and analyses were limited to one subforum, and we don't have key characteristics on those identified as violent and nonviolent that the literature tells us to obviously look at, whether it's employment record, criminal crime record, mental health, peer grievances, so on and so forth. So I got a little bit of funding from my department or college to conduct an innovative extension of this project. So instead of interviewing one former extremist, I'm going to be interviewing several, and I'm going to be using best practice open source methodologies to confirm those identified as violent or nonviolent. I want to know more about their criminal involvement. And then I'm going to explore various user patterns of online behaviors, violence and nonviolent. So in particular, I'm going to be building out this data set extensively, having more usernames, more users identified as violent or nonviolent, and I will be collecting key characteristics when I do these interviews with the former extremists. This will certainly be helpful for key stakeholders in getting a sense of whether certain characteristics are driving differential posting behaviors. And then I will be doing open source intelligence, triangulating the data, using source materials like media reports, police, government documents, terrorism databases, so on and so forth. And again, backtracking through users' online histories and offline engagement will certainly reveal valuable insights in us to combat violent extremism. And I'm not exactly sure yet what my emphasis will be. I've been dealing with MSU's research ethics boards for some time. I finally have the green light. But one thing I may be doing is trying to pinpoint key events. If I can, seeing what the online chatter looks like before and after a key event, for example, like an act of violence, and see if that has an influence on posting behavior. I'm going to look at posting of illegal content or content that breaks the terms of service. I want to look at posting across platforms, if I will, seeing if extremists are trying to push others to smaller platforms, and really trying to develop a multi-risk framework behavior. So, thank you.